So I'd like to introduce Dr. Tony Breu. Dr. Breu is a hospitalist and director of resident education at the VA Boston Healthcare System in Boston, Massachusetts. He completed medical school from Brown and internal medicine residency at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He's an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and also a faculty member at the Center for Bioethics. I think we all know Dr. Breu. He's well known to all of us on Med Twitter for all his tutorials that ask the question why. And alongside with being an exceptional medical educator, he's published papers on the topic of utilizing tutorials for medical education and is also one of the co-hosts of the Curious Clinicians podcast. I've had the pleasure of learning from Dr. Breu on several morning reports and noon conferences at Brigham, and I'm so excited to have him here with us tonight to talk to CardioNerds about all things tutorials. Welcome, Dr. Breu.
Thanks, Rylene. And, I want to start by saying how impressed I am by the work that Dan and everyone else in the leadership has done. I was actually reflecting with Katie Vaughn, who is down in Houston with a bunch of you guys last week. Just a couple of years, you guys have become a juggernaut. It's a little bit intimidating, but sort of, I was reflecting also with another chief resident who's going into cardiology about how this is demonstrative of the cardiologist mentality. It's like, if you're going to, do it big and do it right. And you guys have clearly done that. So kudos to Dan and all the leadership. And I think you guys are undoubtedly learning a ton. My goal for tonight, frankly, is to more show than tell. So I'm going to start by just showing a few things about tutorials, understanding that nearly everyone here has probably heard the term and knows something, if not a lot, about it. But I think it'd be valuable to hear the insights of someone who's written at this point over 100 of these, and for 5 years has given a lot of thought to how to construct them. I'll then spend some time going over the tools that I use when I'm creating them. Because I have found that if you don't have the right tools, it really makes it difficult to be able to research and write a good tutorial. And the reality is, a lot of what I'm going to show in that second half are going to be things that will translate well to anyone who does research, anyone who puts together talks. It's not going to be unique to tutorials. And in fact, it may be things that some of you are going to say, well, this is old hat. But I still want to offer a perspective because clearly 90% of the work of writing a tutorial is not actually typing out 280 characters. It's the legwork of doing the research. For the type of tutorial that I write, many people take things that they've previously done, like say a lecture, and turn it into a tutorial. And in fact, that's probably the right place to start. But it's a little bit different than what I do. So I'm going to drop a bunch of stuff into the chat, including a document that I've put together that will provide some insights. But I'm just going to start first by sort of going over a tutorial as an example and kind of dissecting it a little bit. And what I would suggest people do is unmute and ask questions as things come up. If something you're like, oh, I have a question about that graphic, or I have a question about when you post that, or I have a question about the number. Just unmute, ask the question, or drop it in the chat. And Rylene, if I'm not seeing something in the chat because I'm sharing my screen, just interrupt me. I don't have slide. This is not a prepared lecture. This is meant to be an opportunity for me to just share what I've learned in 5 years.
Great, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right. So, unsurprisingly, I'm going to start by showing you guys a cardiology tutorial. If I showed something about hemolysis, I might have half of you sign off. And Rylene, you can see my screen, yeah?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. So this is something I posted back in November. And again, I'm going to spend a few minutes dissecting it with the intent of just sort of talking out loud about how I think about the construction. And I'll start simply by saying that, first and foremost, you'll notice the timestamp on this is 4:57 on Saturday, November 5th. And if you come to the second tweet, it's going to be the exact same timestamp. And so one of I think the core features, and one of frankly, the essential features, is they have to all be posted simultaneously. I'll show you the tool that I use to do that, which I think has upped my game a bit beyond just, clicking tweet, starting something and adding, which is the way I used to do it. So this is one mechanism you can do, right? I don't do that anymore. I use an actual tool that was constructed specifically for writing tutorials. And like I said, I'll get to that in a little bit. So you'll notice that the timestamp again, and I'll note now that this is a Saturday. And one of the things I've learned is Saturday is the best day. It may be that my audience is a bunch of healthcare professionals who Monday through Friday are, busy doing angiograms, and Saturday, maybe they're doing fewer of them, but I get the most engagement on Saturdays. There are other days of the week that appear to work well, but I lean into Saturday because it's just the best I seem to do in terms of engagement, and we'll talk about like why that's important in a bit as well. And sort of late morning, afternoon, Eastern Standard Time works well as well because it captures, probably my core audience. Frankly, is going to be East Coast people because that's who I know the most. And then it still allows for the West Coast people to see it because it's not at like 4 a.m. their time. And then you will notice that you'll go to bed at night and wake up in the morning and you'll have like this new emergent set of engagement from folks who are 12 hours difference. So Saturday and then sort of late morning Eastern, early afternoon. This one was at 5 p.m. and did okay Eastern Standard Time. I find are the key things or key times for me. When I'm putting it together, I'm a big fan of actually indicating how many tweets are going to be in a tweetorial because as a consumer, I kind of like to know what am I getting myself into. Like if it's going to be something that's 35 tweets long, frankly, unless you really hook me in the first tweet, I ain't interested. But if you tell me something is 6 or 8 or 10, I might be more apt to start because, my interest may not be as likely to wane. Not everyone does this. And in fact, when I've looked at a few hundred tutorials, this doesn't actually, meaning the inclusion of this number doesn't actually increase the probability that someone will quote unquote complete the tutorial. But because I like to see it, I include it. Graphics, we'll talk about when Elon Musk released the Twitter algorithm and the things that will promote your tweet best according to Twitter. I'll say now that including pictures and videos will give you about 2 times the boost for a single tweet than if you did not have it. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about that too. Most of my tweets in my tutorials are going to have images, though not all of them. Similarly, nearly all of them have URLs to published work. I will tell you that many people try to sort of get around the inclusion of the URL because they don't want those 23 characters eating up the precious 280. I would strongly encourage you guys to resist that temptation because I find it exceedingly frustrating when someone makes a claim in a tweet and I can't independently verify it because they haven't given me a source, or they say PubMed ID and then they give me a number and I got to copy and paste it. Or they otherwise don't show their work. So I think particularly for the junior folks who are listening in, the med students, the interns, the folks who don't have cardiologist, in their byline, I think it's really important that you show your work. And part of the showing of the work is including a clear reference for the statements that you're making. I think this is exceedingly important. I think a lot of people fail there, frankly. There's a lot of, I think, benefits of having emojis. I will tell you, I'm a minimalist when it comes to the inclusion of emojis. I think when there's like 20 or 30 of them, they can draw your attention away from the main beat of a tutorial. And so I will sometimes put them in. You can see there's, probably 1 or 2 per, but I'll be honest, try to sort of keep that to a minimum. And similarly, hashtags, kind of keep that to a minimum for 2 reasons, actually. Hashtags are a thing that will decrease Twitter's probability of boosting your tweet, the more hashtags you have. And I think it, again, draws the attention away from what is probably the main meat of what you're trying to say. I'll note that Twitter has many emojis already embedded within their website. but they don't have everything. And so, for example, if I did arrow, right, they have a few arrows, or if I tried to find the one that I just showed you, point, right, it's not there. So this one is one that I actually kind of like to use, and there's a bunch of other ones that aren't embedded within the Twitter website sort of background. And so find a good emoji site if you're the kind of person who wants to make use of these. And then if we sort of come down and get towards the end, the other thing that I'll note is you can make use of both pre-post peer review, and there's universally going to be post publication peer review. And by publication, I mean posting. So here, Michelle Kittleson and Rob Montgomery, I asked them to review this ahead of time. They gave me really great insights. And so I'm giving them their due here. And again, particularly for those of you who are junior, who maybe are kind of stepping into an arena that you don't know as well, I strongly encourage you to make use of pre-posting peer review of some sort. Even if it's as simple as having someone that you trust review it, even if they don't do a more formal review. So I want to show some information about the analytics or the data of a single tweetorial. But before I do that, what questions, if any, do people have at this point about sort of the way this is structured, the inclusion or the exclusion of certain things? What do people want to know so far?
Dr. Breu, this is Devesh. Great insights on this tutorial. What are your thoughts on using tiny URL for decreasing the length of link for papers which when we put in? Because as you know, like Twitter has we have limitations of words, and sometimes we are trying to fight, and so I have used tiny URL to add those links for papers.
It's an important question, because there's a few key things points I need to make here. One is, no matter the length of a URL, it will count as 23 characters. So if you use a tiny URL and you shorten it to 10, Twitter's still going to dock you 23. So I don't use shorteners unless I'm posting a URL that is like 100 characters and it would just kind of look ugly. Then I'll use a shortener. So for example, there was a period of time where I was posting a link to the actual PDF of papers on my Dropbox, and the Dropbox links were 50 characters, and they looked unwieldy. I just didn't like the way they looked. So I used a tiny URL for that. I discourage it because I think as a consumer and as someone who's within medicine, I know what PubMed is. And so if I'm like, oh, he's giving me a PubMed citation, I can click on that and I know what I'm going to get. Whereas a tiny URL, you don't know what's going to be behind that curtain. And so I veer towards using PubMed citations nearly exclusively for what I show. I actually I did a Twitter poll about a year ago, and I asked people what would they like. Would they like a PubMed site URL, a URL to the website that has the paper, or a URL to the PDF of the paper? Like, again, behind Dropbox. Most people wanted a PDF that had a direct link to the PDF, a URL with a direct link to the PDF. I ended up getting a little bit of cold feet about it, and so I did it for a couple months, and then I stopped, and I reverted to just using PubMed URLs, which was the second choice of people. So, I probably heard from a few thousand.
Thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, I did not know that it always 23 characters.
Yeah, always 23.
I never
I don't know
paid
how they
attention
come up with
that
that
closely.
number. It's not divisible by 280 that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing.
Yeah. Other questions?
Kelly on the chat is asking about QR codes for references, similar to what Devesh was asking.
Yeah, I love QR codes. I use them all the time when I have a PowerPoint slide deck. I don't necessarily use them when I'm within tweetorials, though. And one of the reasons, frankly, is that I think there's a way for your phone to read the QR code not using the camera, but I haven't figured that out, and I don't know that a lot of end users have. And I think a lot of people consume Twitter content on their phones. So I want to make it as user-friendly for them to be able to sort of access it. If I was reading it on my computer, I could, just do this. But I'm not sure if that's answering the question, but I do like QR codes in general. I think it's a good technique to use. Other questions?
How do you use polls in your tutorials, and kind of what have you gotten for experience in terms of when to use polls, like in the beginning or at the end, or the same question, doing it multiple times to look at learners, how they're absorbing information, or your best practices in general?
I'm a big fan of using polls, and I'll just show now that this is the software that I use now to create my tutorials, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. It's called Cheer app. The one downside of it is that you can't do polls, and that's why if you look at the tutorials I posted in the last year or so, none of them have polls, because I've been using this because it's been so good to me. If not for that, I'm a big believer in polls, because it kind of gives you a sense for, not necessarily did anyone learn anything from this, because I used to do a lot of pre and post, and the reality is the answer was like sitting right in front of the person. If they didn't get the answer right the second time, it means they didn't actually read the tweet right before it. And I don't think it meant that I taught them just because they got it right more the second time. I'm more interested when I ask a question about what is the baseline knowledge. And it kind of gives me a sense like, was this audience already sort of hot to trot on something I was trying to teach them? So I like to use them, but because of the software I use, I just don't end up using them very often. So keep dropping the questions in the chat. Let me show you a little bit about the data behind an individual tweet. And, I'll just say, full disclosure, I'm not enthusiastic in any way about what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, but I will say that I do like the fact that he's made it more available to see impressions, because I think it's somewhat interesting. Now, this tweet was posted before impressions were made widely available, so you can't see the impressions. But if you click on a tweet, and you can do this for all of your own, and click on the analytics, what you'll see is impressions, engagements, and then a few other things. And I'm going to sort of go over this for a minute or two. Again, many of you know what this means, but I think it's important because I think you want to critically look at the engagement you're getting on what you post. Because I'll say it now and I'll say it again. You are all educators. I'm an educator, right? It should not be controversial for me to say that I want a lot of followers, I want a lot of impressions, I want a lot of likes, and I want a lot of retweets. Not because I have a big ego, though it certainly strokes my ego when those things happen, and I'm not going to lie about it. But the real reason is I'm an educator. I want people to learn. If I can get 1 million people to see something and potentially learn, I'd be a fool not to want that over 1,000. So I should have a goal of getting more eyeballs on what I do. So that means I need to critically look at, well, how many eyeballs am I getting? So here, impressions, as you guys know, is if I'm like, let's say I'm in the middle of giving this session with you guys and I decide to open Twitter and I scroll past a tweet, let's say posted by Gerline, she'll get an impression. Now, let's say I follow Gerline and she posts something and I never scroll past it because I just wasn't on my phone at the time. Even though I follow her, she won't get an impression from me. Okay? And let's say I see it from her and I retweet it, and then Alan sees it, even though he doesn't follow Gerline, an impression will happen. So impressions are just how many times did someone basically scroll past. They don't have to necessarily stop an individual tweet. And then engagements is basically, did they click on anything, right? And so just because you don't have a one-to-one match here doesn't mean they didn't read it, because it could be pure text and there's nothing to actually engage with. Now, when you look at these numbers, I'm happy with this. 338,000 people, and you can get the exact number if you here it is down here. You get the exact number here. I'm very happy with this number. but it is an exceedingly deceiving number. And so if any of you are like gonna sort of promote and say, I posted something that had 338,000 impressions, you want to be careful, because what I've learned in reviewing, again, many hundreds of tutorials is that the degradation rate from first tweet to second tweet is universally about 85 to 95%, right? So if we look at the first tweet, again, 338, and we come down to the second, I dropped to 13.5. It's not because I don't know what I'm doing. It's not because people don't care. It's because there's actually many, many reasons. But one of the biggest is not everyone is going to care, right? And so you're always going to get a drop off of, again, about 85 to 95%. Another way of saying it is only about 5 to 15% of people read on beyond the first tweet. But it gets worse. Because there's going to be continued degradation, right? You're going to lose your audience as they read. And so for reasons that I'm happy to discuss, but I'll just sort of leave and say this is just a fact. The second to last tweet, the third to last tweet is usually the tweet with the least number of impressions, right? So here's the last, here's the second to last, and here is the third to last. So, right, so I went from 300 something to like whatever it was, 12, 15 something to 5. So I am really happy that 5,000 people basically finished the thing. And, just to prove the point, if you look at the second to last tweet, it's got twice as many impressions. And I can describe why that is if people are interested. But ultimately, really, I only got about 5,000 people at best to read the whole thing. I am super happy with that. But it is far, far different than what I think some people try to like claim, which is, 300 and something thousand people read it. That's just not the case. And so the numbers you want to be careful about as people promote the what you're able to achieve. And, just to make this point, here, everyone has access to their own Twitter analytics. So if you go to analytics.twitter.com, and then, you can see the remaining, you got to put in your own username. You can see, right, here was an 8-tweet tutorial, and we're just going to scroll back. So notice, right, last, second to last, third to last is the one with the least. And again, the first one, 72. This degradation rate is going to be consistent. 85 to 95% of your audience is going to leave just having read the first tweet. I'm giving them a mystery, for God's sakes. This is a fantastic mystery. And they're like, I don't care. I'm going away. And they're going to continue to leave because you're not holding their attention. And then you'll get to that third to last one, which is really probably this is a best indicator of how many people you actually were able to teach. Super happy with 3,000. It ain't the 70,000 that I had at the beginning. And the same holds, really no matter which one you look at. 140 about smoking leukocytosis, boom, about 10%. And then we come to the second to last, the third to last, here. This is the least. And there are some exceptions. You'll notice right here, it's actually this one, but you get the idea that you have to be careful about what you look at if you're trying to get a sense for how many people are looking at what I'm doing. So let me stop there a second time and see what questions people have now about kind of like the analytics behind a tutorial as you begin to critically appraise, like, am I reaching the audience that I really want to reach? No, I'm going to stop sharing while I do this, see if people have questions.
There was another question earlier going back to the URL question about references. Yeah. Is it better to include it in the same tweet or at the end, like a list of references?
So yeah, it's a good question. My bias is to put it within the same tweet because that may be the only tweet somebody sees, right? So let's say the fourth tweet in a tutorial, someone's like, oh my God, mind blown. And they retweet that thing. It could be that, Tina and Brianna only see that. Right. And so, yeah, they could like open and read the whole thing, but they may only see that one thing. So I want my URL there. There's cost to this, right? It takes 23 characters, but you know what? There's that famous saying that's been attributed to Mark Twain and to like 25 other people, right? I would have written a shorter letter if I had the time. As most of you have probably heard this phrase, right? The idea being, it takes time to write something that is like tight and short and concise. And you want to take your time and make use of those 280 characters and make it really good. And I will say, as a consumer, I am off put by like 1,000 abbreviations and just like, no spacing between paragraphs. That doesn't look good. And I'm not going to be interested in what you have to say if it looks like it's kind of like thrown together, like just vomited onto the page. Take some time, make it look good. If you have to split it into 2 tweets, that's probably better if each one looks good. And just accept the fact that those 23 characters, those are going to be dead characters. You're going to have to use them if you're going to show your work. And I think showing your work, you're not going to write a paper and not make a claim and not have a citation. So I think the same has to hold here, frankly. Especially if we want this stuff to be taken seriously, and I want it to be taken seriously.
This has just been so helpful. I definitely didn't realize that it only takes 23 characters no matter how long the length of the link is. So that's really helpful. And that kind of relates to Chelsea's question about how mindful should we be about lengths of tutorials in terms of ideal total length if we know that it degrades as we go down in terms of
Yeah. So I've looked at this a little bit. So the short answer is I don't think it matters to a point. So I think if you're anywhere in the 20s or fewer, you're probably okay. And part of the reason I say that is Stephen Chen, who's a dermatologist at MGH. I actually got a bunch of like prolific tutorial people to share all their data with me before it became publicly available, and I kind of looked under the hood. And he had the best retention rate of anyone. So better than me, better than Avi Cooper, better than Kimberly Manning, like, some people who just are knocking it out of the park. And some of his were quite long, like 25 tweets. And so it couldn't be that he was just writing ones that were 10 and people were like willing to finish. I think it was because he was tapping into some like core content that he had a wide range of people that were interested in reading about, like cellulitis. And it sounds like, maybe second nature to everyone who's listening here, but there's a lot of people who are like thirsting for that basic content. And so he had a huge number of people who, if they started, they finished. So if, my bias is fewer than 20, but that I think you can still be okay if you lurk into the 20s. You really want to sort of stay below that. Let me show you, and Gerlin, keep interrupting, but let me put into the chat. This is what Twitter told us when they share their algorithm. Okay. So this is what will get a single tweet boosted, meaning the algorithm is going to like show it to more people. So if you get a like, and by the way, like this is going to sound kind of like sleazy to talk about this, but again, I'm an educator. I am not going to apologize for saying I want you to like retweet what I do. I don't want you to see it, right? Like that's just the reality. Okay. I'm not going to give a lecture at a national meeting and hope that 2 people show up. Like I want 1,000 people in the room. Okay. So I want 1 million people in my room for my tutorial because I want them to learn. So you'll notice that likes actually get more of a boost than retweets. Like who knew? Apparently Twitter. And then you can sort of see a few other things. If a tweet is reported, meaning like, oh, this is bad content, like it really downgrades it. And then I mentioned some other negatives here, a lot of hashtags. I wouldn't make too much hay of this whole like follower ratio because we all got to start somewhere. So, like, don't worry about that. And then sometimes people will like post it, something, and then the next tweet will be just the URL, or they'll just have an image, and those things are going to sort of be downgraded as well. So the way to make use of this is, if Gerline's going to post something, and what you wildly want to do is say, hey, Ronaldo, can you both like and retweet this? My MO in the past, if let's say Paul posted something My MO in the past was just to retweet it. I thought that was going to like show it to my audience, and that was kind of like what it needed. This is telling me there's two different things. Retweeting will get all my followers to potentially see it. That's good. But the like boosts it. And so if I'm a good advocate for you as an educator and I want your content to be seen, I think I got to click on both of those buttons. And that doesn't bother me. But this was kind of news to me. Questions about that?
I think Rachel had a question earlier that kind of relates to that in terms of what types of tutorials. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask that, Rachel?
Oh, sure. So this is kind of taking a step back.
Yes, please.
But the question was, I've seen tutorials that are like case-based, and that like they'll start off with like you're on night float and XYZ happens, and they use polls in that way and then fill in gaps with content.
Yeah.
I guess I was just wondering what your thoughts are about that type.
Well, as a consumer of those, what's your thoughts on it? Do you like them?
I like them. I use them for different things than I use like your tutorials for. So like I'm not Googling, like I'll often Google a topic and then put tweetorial after, and I'll like use that to teach myself.
Yeah, yeah.
But the case-based ones, I'm more just like perusing and doing it more passively, I guess.
Yeah. So I like those. I think they're great as a learner. They may be the kind of one that I'm not going to bookmark and come back to later. But the reality is, again, thinking about someone like Kimberly Manning, like what she does is she's not talking about pathophysiology necessarily when she writes one. She's telling a story that has often a medical undertone and she's still trying to teach. And there's value there. Rahul Ganatra, one of my colleagues, and he works for the Curbsiders. He does critical appraisal tutorials. Here's this paper. Let me sort of tear it apart for you. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I don't think there's any one set formula. What I do, where I sort of look up esoterica and try to like research a question, that's not for everybody. And I think what you need to do is say, what do I like to consume, right? And if you like to consume it, then you're probably going to like to write it. And so don't worry about, well, it seems like a lot of people like this kind. If you like it, I can guarantee other people like it. And if you do it well, then people will be engaged. And the doing it well, it takes some work. It's not something you can just slap together. It seems like you can, whatever, again, 280 characters times 10. But it does take some work, right? If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So I've dropped into the chat a document that I want you guys to have available to you. And so this is, and here's what it looks like. So it's basically the tools that I use when I'm writing tutorials. And I've included the options, and then the one that I use or ones that I use, I've put a star, and then the cost. And you can get away, I'm pretty sure, with spending $0 and still write a good tutorial. I spend like probably 20 to 25 bucks a month for all the services I pay for, but like this is what I do, so it's worth it. I include some of the key features of a citation manager, and I'm going to sort of go over the one that I use in a little bit of detail. They don't pay me. I don't get any promotion. I think it's the best one, and believe me, I have looked at all of these. And then time permitting, we'll talk about some of this other stuff. In particular, should I be plugging my tutorial into Chat GPT? And I will show you why you want to be really careful about that. But let me sort of show you what I might do as I sort of start to research a question. And so let's imagine, and this is true. Last week in Bonnie Report, we had a case of dyspnea, and I made the point, hey, is the guy on ticagrelor, because ticagrelor can cause dyspnea, right? I think all of you probably have heard this. It's kind of like this unique thing. So ticagrelor dyspnea, right? So maybe I'll start in PubMed, maybe I'll start in Google Scholar, maybe I'll just start in Google, maybe I'll start here. And so I'm going to just show you what this might look like if I decided to start in UpToDate. And this, again, is not necessarily tutorial specific. This is just like what we all do, but it's a way for me to demonstrate some of the tools I use. Okay, so some drug information, blah, blah, blah. Let's look under dyspnea. Okay, there's some stuff. Mechanism, fascinating, right? So it's got something about adenosine and the P2Y12 receptor. We're not going to learn about this tonight because I don't want to like spill the beans. I'm going to do a tutorial on this, of course. But let's say I clicked on this and I'm like, okay, I got some interesting hits here. Let me look and try to read a little bit more. So I click on this guy. Okay. You'll notice already something that may be different than your view, right? So first of all, I've got this weird thing on the left. And actually, can someone like raise their hand if they already use ReadCube? Or it's also called Papers. Did anyone already use this? Okay. So you can see, because I have it, it's a Chrome extension too, right? It sort of like knows that I'm looking for this paper, okay? So I'm, whatever. I decide I want this paper, so I'm going to add it to my library. This is, again, very similar to like how Zotero works, how all these other paper pile, there's a ton of these things. This one I think is the best. So I've added it to my library, and it's trying to load the PDF, and look at that. It was actually able to load the PDF, which is kind of cool. So here's the PDF, right? And it didn't open it within ReadCube itself, so I got to actually click this button down here and save it to the app. And then what we're going to do is come over here to ReadCube itself. And you can see already it added my article. Okay. And it's got all the wonderful metadata, right? It's got the DOI. It's got all the sort of goodies that, again, is part of the metadata. So when I want to cite it later, let's say I'm deciding to put something into the New England Journal, right? I got my citation here because when it pulled in the thing into this, it already knew. Okay. So, but I want to read the PDF. So I'm going to come back here and let's look at the PDF for this guy. Okay. And I'm just going to rummage around. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Looks good. And then I realize, okay, this is a good paper, but I need more. The beautiful thing about this is that it lets you go backwards and forwards. And by backwards, I mean, here are all the references that this paper included, right? So the reference number 1, Ludka, is right here, and I can sort of find that paper. And in some instances, I can add it directly from here. But it also includes the papers that have cited this one. And so I could say, all right, what has happened since this paper was submitted? And then again, I could sort of just, let's just say, this one seems super good, and this one seems super good. Let's just add them to my ReadCube, and then here they are, right? Already here, already have the metadata. So the reality is, this has to be facile. This has to be quick. And I will show you one place that it is not quick, and something that even if you decide you're not going to use something like this as you're researching a tutorial or doing other research, you really want to strongly consider doing or including. So let's look at this like 2022 paper. Okay. And so we're going to come over here. It didn't automatically find the PDF for me. Boo-hoo. So we're going to click locate PDF. And it couldn't find it. So unfortunately, I got to go to the page. Okay. And so here I am on Sleep's page. Okay. And I want this paper, but I don't know if I have access to it. And so what I want to do, you always want to accept those cookies. I don't know what that does, but I feel like I have to accept everyone's cookies. You want to use something called an easy proxy. So I think a lot of people will get here. They're like, oh, I want this paper. And then they'll sort of copy and paste this and leave and go out and like come back in from some other direction. They'll like go to their like HMS, like library or whatever. But, the reality is you can just press a button. And so this one here is called Lean. Nearly all of your institutions will work with Lean. And so if you use Chrome, and I think many of us do, I think it works with Safari too. It's an extension. And I'm going to press the button, click access. And you didn't, actually, I should have showed this to you before. had done that. Sorry, gonna bring this down. Okay, so you'll notice, if you didn't notice the change, I'll just point it out. If you come up here, I am now logged into Harvard just by pressing that button. And you'll also notice what wasn't here before was PDF, and now PDF appears. And so I can just click that and apparently have to, go through this ad. But if I click on that easy proxy, I now have access to this PDF without having to do that workaround. Most of us do research. One of the hardest parts is the actual finding of papers. You need to make it easy on yourself. You need to make it facile. And basically, if you have something that's going to immediately get you access to the PDF by pressing a button, you have to take advantage. And so now what I can do is just press, import to ReadCube. And now that PDF is going to be imported into my library in addition to the other information. And so if we maybe show another example of this. So here's, another paper that maybe will be interesting. So we'll have ReadCube try to find it. Can't find it. And so we'll click in here. And then kind of the same idea, right? I can purchase the PDF. No, thank you. I don't love it. And you can see up here, this is just the garden variety one, but I'm going to, actually Harvard is popping up and telling me I have access to this article. So I'm going to click that. And now again, I'm within Harvard, right? Just by pressing that button. And now I have access to the PDF. Okay. So if you aren't already using things like an easy proxy, I strongly, strongly, strongly advise you to do it. Okay. And so I'm going to sort of close most of these windows, but come back to this to point out that you can see now those PDFs are appearing when they didn't otherwise appear. Okay. There are a lot of other bells and whistles to ReadCube that I don't want to take the time to show. I just really wanted to sort of, and I'll say briefly, they include things like, highlighting. They include things like you can use it as when you're writing a paper, it's like EndNote. It does the same kind of function as EndNote, which is essential. And the ability to look backwards and forwards, like what papers have cited this, and go backwards, like what is the reference list, is fantastic. And I'll say, if we come back to this first paper we downloaded, right? It even automatically will download the supplements. So, if you download a paper from New England Journal, they routinely have supplements that include things like the protocol. It'll automatically download. You don't have to ask it to. It just does it for you. I checked. This supplement is just a bunch of the people saying they have no conflicts. So it's not a particularly exciting supplement, but it's a supplement nonetheless. So that's one tool, ReadCube. The other tool is an easy proxy. For the longest time, I was using this one, literally called Easy Proxy, but I came across Lean Library, and I strongly recommend that you see if that one works with your institution. I bet you it does. Download it. It is a game changer in terms of time management. The last thing I'm going to show is just a little bit about CheerApp. Again, not something that I'm paid to promote. I'm just a big fan of it. But it looks like actually there's okay, Ronaldo, you're agreeing. Isn't it huge, right? This is huge, right? So hopefully most of you were already doing this and not wasting your time. But if you weren't, please start doing it now. So what does CheerApp provide for you? Basically, it's a tweetorial writing app. That's all it does, right? So what I do is I say, all right, now I want to start one on ticagrelor. So I'm going to say, I'm just starting the draft here. Why does ticagrelor cause dyspnea? And I'll change this a billion times because I really want to hook people. And then what it does is it'll give you over on the right side a running sort of list of what it looks like. And you'll notice it also tells you how many characters you've got. So you can see over here, I've used 2 of my 280 characters. So something about adenosine, and then what we're going to do, I'll just use this, even though this is not what actually would end up in it, just as a demonstration. And you can see it went up by 23 characters. And then it shows you what it's going to look like. And then let's say, here's the PowerPoint I use when I'm creating all my figures. And you can see it's nearly 1,000 slides long. That's how many damn figures I've made in 5 years. So then the third tweet is going to be, I'm going to include a figure, include it in addition to my URL, and I just Control V and it pastes my figure in, and there it is, right? So you can see across the right side what the final product is going to look like. It tells you how many characters you've got, and then you can schedule it at a specific time. So let's say you finish it, it's midnight, like, I ain't posting at midnight. No one's going to see this damn thing. You decide, I want to post it Saturday at 1 p.m. You can set it Saturday 1 p.m. It'll post it for you, or you could just share it contemporaneously. So again, the big drawback for this thing in my mind is that it doesn't allow you to do polls, but man, I have loved it because it allows me to craft it and save it. Whereas the other way, you can't actually save within Twitter. So if I decide to create a tutorial within Twitter, you can't save those drafts. You have to like copy and paste it into Evernote. It's a huge pain. So wait, let me stop there, see what additional questions folks have, and then maybe I'll make some final comments about ChatGPT because, I can't give it a talk and not mention ChatGPT. Right? Like, isn't that kind of you must do it? So what questions do people have about the kind of tools that I use? And it could be anything that's on that list in that document I shared. Yeah, so Ronaldo, Easy Proxy should work. And there are probably other options beyond those two. And so I would explore because it's I would be shocked if Pittsburgh, if something doesn't work in Pittsburgh. Questions about any of that? Okay. As you come up with them, let me know. But let me just spend a couple minutes showing you the pros and cons of ChatGPT as it relates to tutorials. So, as I was writing or like thinking about the tutorial, I was like, oh, okay. Maybe later when I'm talking about the implications of this and I'm talking about adenosine, maybe I'll like try to mention something about the physiology of the impending doom when all of us give adenosine. I don't think any of us who've ever given adenosine aren't like, you're going to feel like you're about to die. So when I give you this drug, and it's like listed in like real papers that is a literal side effect, the sense of impending doom. So I asked ChatGPT like, how does it cause the sensation of impending doom? Because the reality is a Google search for this landed nothing. There's like, I couldn't find a damn thing about it. And I'll be honest, it gave me some really interesting insights. And what I would probably then do with this is do some targeted searches now based on what ChatGPT gave me, right? And so I've done this actually with a number of the tutorials I've written in the past to sort of see, like, how does ChatGPT do? Like, is it accurate? But I will tell you, you must be careful for a couple of reasons. One is sometimes it is just kind of wrong. Like I've asked it questions where I asked it about why does a pulmonary embolism cause hypoxemia? And it gave me like what I used to say as a first year med student, which I don't think is the answer that has been borne out. And so you want to be a little bit careful about assuming that this thing knows. But it also just lies. So I asked it to give me a history of medical tutorials. Okay. And I was like, frankly honored that it mentioned me, but it somehow decided that in 2015, 3 years before I ever made a tutorial, right, that I was a pulmonary and critical care fellow at MGH. I'd never been to MGH, and I certainly was never a pulmonary critical care fellow. And I certainly didn't start doing this in 2015. So he just like made some shit up and decided to like tell me it. Okay. And then the other thing that you probably heard is And I'm going to pull another window over because I wasn't sure. Okay. So here I asked it a question about Bowman's space because like who doesn't have questions about Bowman's space? I was like, what happens to the pressure in Bowman's space in acute tubular necrosis? Gives me an awesome answer. I said, give me a citation. Gives me a citation, and I checked. This thing doesn't exist. It just made it up. I said, ChatGPT, this doesn't exist. Give me a real article. It apologized and then gave me another bullshit article that does not exist. And I once again said, no, give me an article that is real, that you did not make up. It gave me another one, another fake citation. So, I would hope that all of us would like check the work before putting this in one of our research papers, but also be careful because it makes up like my bio, but it also really amazingly makes up some like, I mean, this is a brilliant citation. It just happens to be a total fabrication. That is how good AI has become. So I will continue to use this because I have found true value as I research things. Like I'll give you just one last example. If I can find it, I've plugged a ton of stuff in. Well, I'll just tell you. I asked it about the difference between hemolysis and rhabdo in terms of the rate of AKI. Like, why is rhabdo more likely to cause AKI? Because heme is the toxic molecule in both conditions. And I'd written a tutorial about it like a couple years ago, and I asked it this question, and it gave me a bunch of other insights that I hadn't thought of that I thought were totally spot on. So it is smart, but it is also a pathological liar. So with the good comes the bad. All right, what questions do people have?
I have a quick question about the analytics.
Yeah, please.
I was wondering what's the best corollary that you found in terms of feeling like people really did engage or learn, or whether it's sort of is it truly the engagements, or is there like a pattern of degradation or anything that you've seen?
I don't know. What I think is if you could give me one value, right? For impressions, engagements, clicks, whatever it is, I would ask for the impressions for the tweet that has the least number of impressions. And so if I post 12 tweets and tweet number 9 has the least number of impressions, that's the number I want to know, because that's the most number of people that could have possibly read every single tweet, right? And if I want to write 12 tweets, it's because I think 12 tweets are necessary to make my point. I have obviously no clue, nor do any of you, about whether or not those 5,000 people who read the 12 tweets learned anything. But here's the thing, like people will then critique that about social media, but I give lectures all the time. I don't give a post test, right? And people fall asleep in my lectures. And so I know that those people didn't learn anything. And the people who are awake, I mean, Gerline came a couple of weeks ago. I did a new conference at Brigham. I have no clue if Gerline learned anything. I'm not going to ask her because that would be awkward. But we just take at face value that if I give an in-person lecture or even a Zoom lecture, that my audience is learning. But somehow social media has to prove it that the audience is learning. And I do think that all domains of education should have some proof, but I don't think social media is unique and should be held to a different standard. I am biased, but I still give in-person stuff too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Breu. This has just been such a helpful session, like all the practical advice of when to post, how long to post, the analytics and how that works, and just how you kind of go about breaking down and feeding the content and organizing yourself in terms of the resources. I think it's just been eye-opening to a lot of us and really, really helpful. So thank you so much for your time.